My father's friend of Bracha was always a chayviv tzion. In the 60s, probably 1964, he came with my mother and my younger brother, Reb. Someone just mentioned before my brother. He was then a baby. They came in the summer to visit Eretz Yisrael. See Eretz Yisrael. This is before the 6-Day War. Eretz Yisrael then was like a very maybe dangerous place, and very underdeveloped country in the Middle East, and it took some courage for my father to convince my mother to come on this tiyul to Eretz Yisrael. But it meant something to him. He had a very good friend, Rabbi Mordechai Elephant, who came to Eretz Yisrael in the 50s, when they were probably like, you could count the amount of Americans that were then in Eretz Yisrael on your fingers, probably. He came to Eretz Yisrael then. He got married very young, and he didn't have children for a number of years. So he thought that going to Eretz Yisrael would be a school, maybe he'll have children. So they came to Eretz Yisrael back in the 50s. And he opened up a kollel, and he used to come to America every year to collect money. And he used to stay in our house, and he would always be nudging, speaking to my father. He'd come to Eretz Yisrael, we'll open up a yeshiva together, come to Eretz Yisrael. So that actually brought that first visit. Of course, after that first visit, so my mother said, "Don't ever speak to me again about coming to Eretz Yisrael." My father was a Rabbi in Kamenetsky Yeshiva in high school in Borough Park, and then afterwards he got Long Beach, the Mesifta there, the fourth year Mesifta. So the year after the 6-Day War, things kind of didn't work out in Long Beach. And my father had a shul in Brooklyn in a neighborhood called East New York. Yeah, any New Yorkers here? Remember such a neighborhood? East New York, it's past Brownsville. That's in the Bronx. So you don't know. East New York is now it's a neighborhood that by day it would be safe for you to pass through the neighborhood in an armored car. Then, back in those years, it was like a pretty Jewish neighborhood, but people were leaving. And my father had a very big shul there. And I remember one Shabbos morning, my father tells me, "Yosef, count how many people there are here." I counted 140 people that Shabbos morning. And then the next week again, my father says to me, towards the end of Dami by Musaf, he says, count. Over that year, it went down to 70. It was half of the Jewish community. They were all leaving by the masses. They were going to Flatbush, maybe a trickle to Borough Park, but Flatbush was the place where everybody was going. East Flatbush, there was also in the Jewish neighborhood. Even some went to Canarsie, but everybody was leaving East New York. So the fact that his teaching job in Long Beach and also the shul, he tried actually looking for different rabbanos. I remember he tried out in different places. In Yiddish, it's called a probe. He had to go through a probe in a couple of places. Lemaisa, it was then after the 6-Day War, and again, Rabbi Elephant made his annual visit, and my father said, "That's it, we're going to Eretz Yisrael." So after the 6-Day War, there was a very big Slavos, a lot of American families then. Nothing compared to what's nowadays, right? Nothing. A lot. 25 families. Okay, that was then a lot. you have to realize I'm talking about when we came to Yerushalayim, there was one single traffic light, the intersection of Yaffo and King George. That was the only single traffic light in Yerushalayim. And I remember that Arabs used to come from the old city and stand and look at it. I wonder how a green light changes to the red light, and then the red light changes to the green light. And then all the Arabs, the men, they all wore kafiyas and long jalabiyas. They were they were not exposed to Western civilization at all yet. So that's how they used to come by foot, of course, from the old city to look at the traffic light. So I'm talking about, say, 25 American families then made Aliyah. My grandfather, Reb Yaakov, was very unhappy about the move. I actually found out years later from Chashvi in Detroit, Rabbi Pearlstein, who was my grandfather's Heusbacher. Used to kind of like help him out a little, whatever. He told me that my grandfather actually went to speak to Wolf Alpert. Wolf Alpert is not alive, of course, nowadays. His son is in Kew Gardens. I forgot his first name. He had a brother in Englewood, Joe Alpert. You don't know his names. Okay. Whatever. Wolf Alpert owned a couple of buildings on Madison Avenue. A couple of buildings. I don't mean like a building like this. I'm talking about like a building of 40, 50 stores. So my grandfather actually went to speak to him to maybe do a Yisachar Zvulim with my father, so that my father should stay in America. Because that's how extreme it was in my grandfather's eyes that he should not go to Eretz Yisrael. But it wasn't just Eretz Yisrael. It was, I think, also because he didn't want to go into partnership with Rabbi Elephant. He didn't like that idea either. Wasn't keen on it. In any event, my father had made up his mind already, and we came to Eretz Yisrael. Now, I want to explain to you. Don't think that my grandfather, Reb Yaakov, was not a Chovev Tzion. He himself, in the mid-1930s, when he was a Rav in Lita, in a small place, he had already 6 children, they were growing up. My oldest aunt was already 18 years old, Rabbi Shurin, that afterwards lived in Efrat many years. She was already 18 years old, so, Yiddish, Medaf Zuzagen Kest. That's what used to be there once upon a time. The Gat to promise a couple of years of support. But his son-in-law was sitting and learning. So he didn't have that money, so he was trying to get a better job. A bigger city would be a Rabbanis that paid better. And that's a separate whole story, how the Hashgacha, every time he was promised a better job, it fell apart. And that actually forced him to go to America. He went by himself in 1937 without his family, because he was going to come back to Lithuania with some money. And then it was only the family met up 2 years later, because that's when he made enough money. Because in the midterm, he already changed his mind. He decided he's not going back to Europe. He's going to bring the family to America because he foresaw that there's going to be a war. That's unbelievable. 1938. So he changed his mind. That's when the switch happened. Purim 1938. It was the Purim Suda with another 2 European gentlemen that were visiting in America at the time, and he made them give him a Tkiyas Kaf that they're not going back to Europe. That's how strong he was about it. In any event, but he during those years in the mid-30s, when he was looking for something, he actually thought of coming to Eretz Yisrael. He even wrote a whole chibur on the Rambam, and he thought that he's going to send it to Meiser of Cook, so they'll maybe publish it, and thereby also he'll get some publicity. They'll get to know him. They might be interested in him, and that way maybe he'll get in those days you needed a certificate from the British to get into Israel. The British didn't want Jews coming to the kids are so whatever, but then he changed his mind. His in-laws were already living in Eretz Yisrael. Because my great-grandparents are buried on Har Hazeisim. They came to Eretz Yisrael in 1932. So you should know that Eden and Litta, right, it was everybody's like dream to come to Eretz Yisrael, to live in Eretz Yisrael. It was like a Dover Pashut. That I'll tell you a murder story. When Canada joined the war, and I think already after like Japan attacked America, so they called all foreign citizens to be questioned. So they had to fill out all kinds of forms and questionnaires, whatever. They were like afraid of a fifth column, like, all kinds of people are foreign citizens, not Canadians, not British citizens. It was part of the Commonwealth thing. So they called my grandfather, they had Lithuanian citizenship. So they were called in. My grandfather didn't know English at the time, but my father, so, kids, they grasp a new language very quickly. It's not such a difficult thing for children to pick up another language. So my grandfather took along my father to help him. So my father would, read in English, whatever, and then he would type it in Yiddish. What's the question? And my grandfather would say, yeah, write this and this in English. So they're going through so one question was, are you from the restricted areas in Asia that are in war? Or some kind of question like that. My father says it over in Yiddish to my grandfather. So wir kommen von Asien. So my grandfather says, was soll man entfernen? Which should we answer? So my father looks at this. My grandma says, wir sind doch Europäische. We're Europeans. We're not from Asia. So my grandfather says back then, what do you mean? We're Jews. We come from Asia. Okay. So that's my grandfather says back my father. So I said, he said, the stuff there. They didn't mean like, because 2,000 years ago we came from Asia. Like, they're not talking about that. Right? But my grandfather, right, he saw himself like, I come from Asia. I don't come from Russia where he was born, or later he got Lithuanian citizenship. That's just like, I'm passing through in these countries, right? But I belong in Eretz Yisrael. That's my real country, right? So this was like a double pashut for Eden. I'm all looking at in Lithuania. For the Little for sure was like that. I don't know about in Hungary where they have like, big kanoyas or whatever. But in Little, stop people, they were all Chayvavetzion. My grandfather didn't want my father to go to Eretz Yisrael then after the 6-Day War, because he held that there's no chinuch that's good here in Eretz Yisrael. It's either you're Meisharim, right? Or you're in the Mizrahi, you're going to have to go to the army. And then, as we know, that the statistics of Mizrahi children that go to the army, how many of them remain from, is not the greatest number. We know that. It's been statistically proven, right? So my grandfather felt that the normal American yeshiva high school, that you have a high school diploma, right? Not like here in Eretz Yisrael where the Melichal is Asur, and my grandfather felt that if you're here in Eretz Yisrael, you have to, you're coming here, so you have to be Mavatar on the Melichal. That's what he held. You have to conform to the rules of the Chareidi society. That's what he felt. Not to go against. Okay, but I'm talking about this 40 years ago, right? It's not, things have changed, right? There's big American communities, there's already much bigger demand, whatever, it's already, things have changed. Like constantly, society goes through changes. But I'm talking about 40 years ago, he felt that it was wrong, whatever. So he felt that there's not going to be good chinuch over here, and that was like the main reason why he didn't want my father to come. And also because he didn't like the partnership with Entry, he didn't like that also. So that's like, and of course, because secular Zionists, right? So back in the beginning of the state, they were trying to make as many religious Jews, non-religious. I mean, that was definitely a goal and an aim of the years. Can't deny that. So he felt that better stay in America, it's safer. The Maisa, we left, and my father and grandfather, they were harsh words, I would say, and we left. It was those not pleasant terms. My bar mitzvah took place shortly after in Eretz Yisrael, and my grandfather came to my bar mitzvah. It was his way to appease my father and try to, make peace. But nevertheless, I gave my speech first by the bar mitzvah, and I spoke in Ivrit. And I remember that there was one word that my father put into the speech that I didn't even know what it meant. A more modern Hebrew word, munach hilchati, a halachic term, right? A munach is a term, right? And I didn't know what it meant exactly, because it's not a word that you find in English or Gemara. Like, my Hebrew was still very limited. Oh yeah, from the chop, yeah. But and I remember I was arguing, I was questioning. I said, my father, why do I have to speak in Yiddish? Why can't I just speak in Yiddish? It would be much more natural and easier for me. It's, in Cheder in America, all the years I spoke Yiddish. I was actually in a number of Chadarim. In one Cheder, actually, no one knew how to speak English even. I was probably one of the only kids in class that knew how to speak English. That they got, right? So I would feel much more comfortable in Yiddish. My father insisted that I speak in Hebrew. Now, I don't think that he meant it against my grandfather. I don't think he meant that. I think it was because there were non-religious relatives that came to my bar mitzvah. On my mother's side, so my grandfather, Rav David Lifshitz, anyone here from YU, Rav David Lifshitz, he had 3 sisters here in Eretz Yisrael that came in the 30s. And one was a little religious, one was not religious, one was impartial to religion, whatever, those 3 sisters. And he also had 2 brothers-in-law. It was my puppy, had 2 brothers that also came to Eretz Yisrael in the 30s, all from Linda. Right, so they were all, the 2 brothers were mapamnikim. They were mamish, like rebellious, right? But there was a avira, the atmosphere in Little was right. It's a Jewish ideal, right? So it's the land that for thousands of years the Jewish people have been dreaming about going there. Anyhow, so these friar relatives with their children all came to my bar mitzvah, but after we. So I think my father wanted, as a show to them, that we're not what we call that is galuti. אנחנו ישראלים, מדברים בעברית, but from. I think that's why it was so important for my father. But I never asked him this question. It's something that came up in my mind more because of Kedushas Tziyun, which is in the last few years. So my father was nifter over 3 years ago. I didn't have really a chance to thrash it out with him. But my grandfather came to my bar mitzvah, and sure enough, right after I finished speaking, my grandfather got up to speak, and he said in Yiddish, "Oh, I'm sure that the bar mitzvah bacha spoke very well, even though I didn't really understand much of what he said because he wasn't speaking in Yiddish; he was speaking in Ivrit." And then he went on and gave his own drasha, but he had to give that, shtoch at the opening of his speech, right? Okay. So, he came to my bar mitzvah to appease my father, but he was trying to send a message I'm not becoming Israeli Zionist or something. I'm still where I was, but I want to be on good terms with you. So I made the effort. I came to the bar mitzvah. In those days, there were no direct flights to, and he wasn't a youngster, and he made the effort to come. That's, it was appreciated. The mice at that time that we made Aliyah, there were a number of families. The Petrovs from Professor Petrov is not alive anymore. Reb Yaakov Petrov, he was a professor for Semitic languages, I think, and in Bar Ilan, right?
What's his father?
Yosef Petrov's father, right? His father, right? So he was very close to my grandfather back from Toronto, and they made Aliyah. And then there were the Kirschenbaums. The Ephraim Kirschenbaum, he's a Rav in the Shemesh somewhere here.
Yeah, Pnei Shmuel.
Pnei Shmuel. And his younger brother is Rabbi in Yeshiva Dol in Haifa in Nachas Halavim. Right, Kirschenbaum.
You wrote a book about what's it called, Koach Bezdin, something like that.
But their father was Nifter, Reb Aaron Kirschenbaum. He was actually also a professor. I think they lived in Ramat Gan. I remember I was in the house in Ramat Gan once in Purim, but I forgot where he taught. In any event, so he was very close to my grandfather. Actually, he heard shiurim from my grandfather in Tervadas. And they also made an Aliyah at that time. And then there were the Kiels. They lived in Sened Muchevet. Reb Yankel Kiel is not alive. So I then learned in the Yishuv together with Kirschenbaum and Kiel. And my grandfather, he didn't know exactly that the Yishuv is not Mizrahi and not, it's with Bagrut. So it's not like, Chareidi Sharm or whatever. So he didn't know what it is, but he heard that there's a Limudik Chol there. So it was a calamity in his eyes. And actually, that was the whole theme of his drasha that he gave by the Bar Mitzvah. He said over his very famous Shtickle Torah why Yaakov went to Shem Ve'eva for 14 years before he went to Lavan. He didn't learn enough Torah by Avram Avinu, by Yitzchak. He had to go to Shem Ve'eva. So his thought was that the Torah of Avram and Yitzchak was to go out and be Makarev. Avram Avinu, Tzanefesh Asher Asu B'Charon. Shem Ve'eva, their Avodah was entirely different. Shem was in Dora Mabel, Eva was Dora Floga. Their whole Avodah was not to be influenced by the outside. Because Shem knew very well that no one in Dora Mabel was going to be Chayzer B'Tshuva. It's worthless. Halavai, I should not become one of them. And Eva also, the Dora Floga, there was no one to talk to. But Avram Yitzchak, their whole Mahalach was different. The people were already different than whatever, it was different times. And so Yaakov, when he went to Lavan, he knew exactly who Lavan is. And he's not going to make him into a Baal Tshuva. The kunz is, in Lavan Garti, v'tayak shamati. How do you do that? You got to go to Shiva's Shem Ve'eva for 14 years, become real stark, and build up like, a certain personality that I remain uninfluenced by Lavan. So my grandfather said over that that's the pshat why what it says that Yaakov taught Yosef, Ben Skunin Ulai, that he taught him. He gave him over the Torah of Shem Ve'eva because he saw Baruch HaKodesh that Yosef is going to be estranged from his family. He's going to be Mitzrayim. And the only way he's going to be able to survive over there and not become Egyptianized is by having this Torah Shem Ve'eva. And my grandfather concluded, Ich bin Yankiv, und du bist Yosef, ich geb dir rüber the Torah Shem Ve'eva. That's how he finished his drasha. Meaning, not everybody in the crowd understood exactly what he meant, but we understood that I'm going to the Yishuv, and I need to have the fortifications not to become influenced. So that was my bar mitzvah, that I was together with my grandfather. Then I did not see him until I was already married with a child. My grandfather came then in 1980 to the Knesset Gdola. So I was already married, and Rabbi Ephraim Kirschenbaum was already married, and Kiel was married. From the Petrovs, I don't know if anyone was married then because they're younger a little, but all these people who hadn't seen my grandfather for years, he didn't come to Eretz Yisrael for over 10 years. Right? From my bar mitzvah until already I was a younger man. So they all came, they paid visits to him. And my grandfather saw that the chinuch in Eretz Yisrael is bearable. Not only bearable, actually, it's very successful. He saw very choshev in Galite, B'nai Torah. Right? Frank Krishna was a Rav nowadays, whatever. I mean, the Petrovs, a little extreme even. Right? and whatever. And I was already married. I was also, I was in Chappelle and B'nai. My grandfather saw that it wasn't exactly the way he saw things, and kind of like he mellowed. That was 1980. He didn't come to my wedding. A year later, in 1981, a younger sister of mine got married, and he decided that he has to come to the wedding. It's an excuse. Siba l'misiba. So it's just to come to Eretz Yisrael. So he came then. Both these visits, he came without his rebbes. It was a second marriage, but she didn't come along. She was already also, my grandfather was already in the 90s, so she was in the 80s. When it was hard, she didn't come. That was 1981 for my sister's wedding. In 1982, he convinced the Rebbitzin that 2 visits that Yisrael you missed, have to take it to Yisrael on a visit. You deserve it. So already he didn't have an excuse. He came with his Rebbitzin. The 2 first visits he came for 10 days, and he was by himself. So he stayed by my father. But this time he came with his wife. So Rabbi Alexander Lynchner from Boys Town set him up an apartment in Beit Vegan, and he was there like almost a month. And he mamish really took a strong liking to Eretz Yisrael. And he had a Mokum Kvura in America. And he stressed to my father, like, if anything happens to me, everything chaschu, don't take me out of Eretz Yisrael. At least I'll be buried here. I'm not zeicha to live here. And his second wife, so she had children in Toronto. So she wasn't going to move to Eretz Yisrael. New York, okay, that's like within range to Toronto, but to Eretz Yisrael, that's a little too far. But I think, actually, as I'm talking, I now remember my grandmother passed away in 1954. My father's younger brother was still a bacher. So my grandfather didn't want to remarry. When he turned 65, he made a visit then to Eretz Yisrael, and he was seriously considering of becoming a pensioner. He was going to get American Social Security, worked at Tervadas all the years, right? So he was going to get American Social Security, and he thought that maybe he'll move to Eretz Yisrael. He's by himself, He doesn't have to ask if his wife wants to come along or not. He can make the decision by himself. So he thought of coming to Eretz Yisrael. Now, so this is when he was 65. So he was born in 1891. So this is 1956. In 1956, my grandmother passed away 2 years earlier. 1956, he was still single. He didn't remarry until 1960, after my father's younger brother got engaged, or whatever. The kids, so in 1956, he made a visit here to Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Zalman Meltzer was nifted, if I'm not mistaken, in 1953, somewhere like that. Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Rabbi Zalman's son-in-law, became the official Rosh Hashiva of Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. Yeshiva's Eitz Chaim, the one by Machne Yehuda. And he would actually come once a year, give some couple of shiurim, whatever. And so when he heard that my grandfather was going to Etzrol, he said to him, Reb Yaakov, I'll give you away Eitz Chaim. You come to a yeshiva in Eitz Chaim. Free me up from this shiva that I have to come once a year to Eretz Yisrael. You want to go to Eretz Yisrael? You want to maybe stay in Eretz Yisrael? Very good. I have a job for you. You'll be the Rosh Hashanah in Eitz Chaim. My grandfather actually went and visited the place, took a look at it. He saw that the Yerushalayim, the Kechavadi, it's not for him. Yeah, whatever. He saw that it's not. It's a whole different mentality. My grandfather was from Litta, he was Slabotka. It's a whole different mahalach, not what they call Chalma. Yerushalayim, it's a different world. In any event, when he was here in Eretz Yisrael, he met up with an old-time friend of his that lived in Slabotka, Beryl Dvinska, Shapiro. This Beryl Dvinska from Dvinsk was close to the Rogatchover, and the Rogatchover told him, you should become a doctor. So at one point, after learning Slabotka many years, he went to Berlin, and he actually became a psychiatrist. And he practiced. Then when the Nazis came to power, so he fled Germany, whatever, he ended up in America. Then years later, when my grandfather became Rosh Hashanah Tarvadas, the Slabotka had a Histadrut Bogrei Slabotka. How do you translate in English? The alumni union of Slabotka, that they used to get together once a month and sit and learn all day. And they used to have guys amongst themselves giving chaburas, and they had Mar Mekaymis, and then Rav Nosson, he was the mashgiach in Ritzchel Chanan, he was a Slabotka, he would give a shmooze. It was like a whole day that each guy would take off. So Beryl Dvinska would also come there. My grandfather met up with him over there. Oh, my good friend Beryl, whatever, what are you doing? Whatever. So my grandfather started sending him bachrim from Torah V'das. Because where do you find a psychiatrist in America who's a ben Torah, an El Chayid? So he's not going to give him some kind of like a krum ha'etzah. So my grandfather actually made good use of him. So this Beryl Dvinska was a little older than my grandfather, and when he turned 65, he left America and made Aliyah. I'm talking about in 1956. Again, my point is that by Litva Shehidin, there was a double pasha that if you could make it to Eretz Yisrael, if you have the ability, you do it. What's the question? He was then already in Eretz Yisrael, and my grandfather then went to visit him. He heard what my grandfather's thinking about leaving Torah V'das and retiring because he has already Social Security. He started screaming and shouting at him. He said, Chazal say, on ein adam meis ela mitoch batola. It's a Chazal, the Torah Tmima and Pashas Vayechi brings it down, where it says, Yosef Yaakov is raglo v'lamita vayikva. So once you already are not doing anything, you die. And he started telling him, what are you talking about? You're a Rosh Hashiva Torah Das. You're giving shiurim. You're in the middle of your life. You got to give it up and you come retire. You're going to die here. So he started giving him Musa. That's what actually convinced him to go back to America and continue Torah Das. But I'm just showing you that back in 56, he had already a Havamina. So now let's fast forward back to 1982. On his third visit here in Eretz Yisrael, he really was enjoying it. He loved it. I remember he used to go to shul and look at the little kids davening. And he would say, look how they daven, so geschmack. He was like the spell from every little thing. It's Yisrael. Like he was in euphoria. So Baruch Hashem, I think that's Rabbi Frank Kirschbaum, Keel, Petrov, all these people actually, we caused my grandfather to make that turnaround. Okay, that's all I can remember offhand. I didn't really prepare anything. As I'm talking, I just keep on thinking and remembering things. Okay, say this.
The discussion between the person who was there, between you and the Shemai Review. You know anything about it? He was saying it. Then they say they was Chayzer or something.
That was, they're good. They have an annual conference, So the conference in November, after the 6 Day War, the 6 Day War was in June, right? So it's June, July, August, September, October, November. Thanksgiving weekend is the Anglo Chareidi conference in America. So, who got up to speak first? Rav Nosson. And Rav Nosson gave a very anti-Zionistic speech. Very anti-Zionistic. And then I think there was one of the Rebbes, I don't know, I remember who, gave like pro-Israel. And then Rav Gifter spoke, and it was again like very anti-Israel. And then the Boston Rebbe spoke, and again it was like pro-Israel. And it it started becoming like a machlokes between the Hasidim and the literature for or against Eretz Yisrael. And my grandfather actually also spoke, and he also like came out sounding like he's against Eretz Yisrael. Basically, he was saying like, people shouldn't. There was a lot of talk then about people going to Eretz Yisrael, and he was like saying that don't go rush off to Eretz Yisrael because the dangers of the chinuch here, etc. And I was explaining before. Then at the end, Rabbi Levine was the guest from Eretz Yisrael. Every convention, once upon a time before, they split between Degel and Aguda. So they used to have a representative from Eretz Yisrael Aguda that used to be invited to come and speak there. So Rabbi Levine got up and he started speaking, and he was telling over like from World War II, what they suffered, what they went through in Warsaw at the time that the Nazis were busy conquering Poland, and the first few weeks, the defense that the Nazis did against the Jews, and Baruch Hashem, he managed to escape. So he was speaking a lot about that, about the Holocaust. And then he said, Baruch Hashem, now after the 6 Day War, the Rebbe Shalom saves Klal Yisrael. So after he spoke, like, it shook up my grandfather, and my grandfather sent like a note to the MC to say, I didn't see exactly the words of the note, but basically it was that I'm taking my words back. Meaning like, if you want to go to Eretz Yisrael, go to Eretz Yisrael. Right? That's very cool. So, you see that my grandfather was a flexible person. even then he could change his mind. So in my case, in my personal family, like, history, he also eventually changed his mind. And he appreciated very much that I'm in Eretz Yisrael. I remember I was then davening Vasikin every day. And so was my younger brother, Yom Bechut, Reb Kamenetsky, my younger brother in Haranov. Both of us were davening every day Vasikin, and we had a Seder to learn right after davening. And my grandfather said, like, only in Eretz Yisrael can I have grandchildren who are davening Vasikin. Like, I remember he said such a sentence like that. He was like so proud.
The story wasn't something, one of the speeches that he heard that were able to say that Shoah, of course, the Holocaust, of course, is from God, but the 6 Day War is the Sitra Acher. And
that's
someone
the Rebbe, you could see.
That's not my grandfather.
No, but didn't someone said then your grandfather heard and said, you're right? No, that was not at that. I just remember something like that.
Yeah, that's a different
The
story.
Shepard used to say all the time, used to say, you can't, either. You can't say that the Holocaust was
So
a
like
Jewish
someone said that, and then that's Reb Yaakov changed it.
I'll tell you, the Satmar Rav already in 1956 was in America. In 49, 48, he was in Israel. But then he left Israel, so he would just be here with the Zionists, and he took off to America. In 1956, he was already in Williamsburg. So after the Sinai campaign, he spoke Shalosh Shudas, and he said that it's Maisa Sot. The victory of the Sinai campaign was Maisa Sot. It was the work of the Satan. As the Rebbe Shalom cannot, such that the Rebbe Shalom would perform such miracles to such big Rishoyim. That's what the Satan Rav said. My grandfather was single then in 1956, like I said earlier. Yeah. So he would go eat the Malka in the dining room of Tervadas. The basement was where they had the dining room. So he would go to eat Malka there because they didn't have food, he didn't make food in the house, whatever. The Kitzah, when he comes, he sees that the Bachrim are koching. So he asked, what's going on? So he said that there was some Bachman that went Shalashudis to the Tish. They heard the Satrov. The Satrov said it was my Sasot. So there was a Yid that lived in Bnei Brak. He's really not alive. He never had children. But he was from Argentina and had learned in Torah V'das then in 1956. And he told my brother Reuven that he never saw my grandfather get so angry. He became red in the face and he banged on the table, quiet, and he said, how could he say that it was my Sasot? There's enough El Chiyid in Eretz Yisrael that the Rabbi should perform supernatural miracles to save the Yid in Eretz Yisrael. Of course, it was the Rabbi who did this. How could he say that it was my Sasot? He was so angry and upset. Doesn't mean that he wasn't Mechaber the Satarov. He held very hard with Satarov. He lived actually across the street from in Williamsburg. They lived across the street from each other. So he always used to see him, whatever. They used to talk a lot, whatever. But he held in Hashkafa, in this sheet. He's totally wrong. This is already 1946, 56. I'm talking about. Okay, so.